It's Listener Questions live on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Happy to have all of you with us. Happy Friday to you as we get set for week 4. The Jaguars coming to town to take on the Cincinnati Bengals. A lot to get to. We got to a lot of stuff on Wednesday night, John, joined by my co-host, John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We got to a lot of stuff on Wednesday night, previewing the game and whatnot, but a lot of questions on fans' minds, and that's what today's about, my friend.
Yeah, a lot of developments between Wednesday night and here on Friday afternoon. I'm sure we're going to get to some, but let's go ahead and kick this thing off.
Yeah, do you want to, real quickly, catch us up on some of this stuff? I know there's some injury stuff with, especially on the defensive side of the ball as of early Friday afternoon.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go through the old Twitter timeline here and try to catch you guys up as best as possible. Right now we have, as of 20 minutes ago, Geno Atkins is not expected to play. I think he was limited throughout practice this week, but only doing the individual drills, so didn't progress enough to the point where he was practicing with the team. No Devin K. I don't think Geno is pulling an AJ off the Facebook chat. We also have Logan Wilson is doubtful with a concussion. He didn't practice all week. Mackenzie Alexander is also doubtful with a ribs and hamstring injury. He practiced on Thursday, but I think he missed Friday's practice. So we got some definite inactives ahead for Sunday, and one of them is, in fact, Geno Atkins.
That's not a good sign for the Cincinnati Bengals. You mentioned Logan Wilson. An interesting one here too, John. You saw that I shared Jay Morrison's Twitter account here, and once again, we may have a little bit of musical chairs at the offensive line here. That's not the one. It would be this one right here. Well, at any rate, I'll share it in just a minute. But it is the right guard situation. The Cincinnati Bengals may be starting old friend, or maybe getting time for old friend Alex Redmond. There was some talk from Ben Baby of ESPN yesterday saying that, Jim Turner was working with him specifically before practice, and now you've got a little bit of some vague things with the right guard situation. So, I don't know what you make of that.
It's vague without being vague, because Taylor said in his press conference that he expects Alex Redmond to be elevated from the practice squad for this week, and all indications say that he's probably going to get the starting nod. If he's going to play the entire game, probably not, based off the last 3 weeks when they've been rotating guards in and out. But yeah, I think Redmond's going to get his chance this week.
Well, that's that. So far, again, injuries and other pieces of news are on the front burner here for the Cincinnati Bengals. They, on some hands, feel like they're well prepared, but on others, the injury bug continues to bite them, and it looks like it'll be the 4th straight game. Geno Atkins missing potentially the entire month of September and even a little bit into October for the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's start getting to these questions. You can submit your questions. We wanted to update you on some recent news, so in case you wanted to ask some questions on health and all that kind of stuff, we got you updated so you can maybe alter your questions you're going to submit to us. You can call or text 949-542-6241. We've got 3 live comment threads going, one in YouTube, one in the Facebook chat, and on cincyjungle.com. There is a post there, so we'll be monitoring that. You can email us, the obinsider@gmail.com, and then, of course, we've got the Twitter account at BankOBI. So, John, let's kick it off with good friend Dan from Tennessee. He texted us, I think it's time for Joe Burrow to call the plays. I know he's a rookie, but he has the ability to do so. Right now, Zach's play calling is more vanilla than a cone in Baskin-Robbins. Have a great weekend. My understanding is that he is calling out quite a few of the protections, et cetera, at the line, but correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Does any quarterback call plays?
I don't think he called.
Like honestly, I'm not sure if there's even one quarterback in the NFL that actually calls plays, and the offense coordinator, the head coach, doesn't do anything. Like, I know it's frustrating because Taylor hasn't produced any results in now 1 1/4 of a year. But those those duties would be delegated to Brian Callahan way before they would go to Joe Burrow. So I'm not sure if that's even a realistic option. He, like you said, he makes adjustments at the line. He has free will to do whatever he wants and do all the stuff depending on what he sees with coverages and defensive fronts. But I don't think you're ever going to see Joe Burrow call his own plays.
Correct. I don't believe that's the case. And like I said, I think, there's maybe some freedom to audible and maybe some freedom to, call out the protections and different things at the line. But I don't think he's going to be Joe Burrow as a rookie is not going to be also offensive coordinator / passing game coordinator. I don't see that happening. Where are we going next, John?
We got some more questions about the coaching staff in general. Where was this one? I swear. Oh yeah. Text from 513. Why doesn't Zach Taylor call more screens if pass protection is such a problem? Use the aggression of the pass rushers to his advantage. They're not good at screens. I don't know if you have watched their screen game this year, but they are absolutely terrible at getting out to the second level and taking care of those linebackers and cornerbacks to create even any space for the screen. So in theory, yeah, the screen would naturally slow down the pass rush or negate it to an extent where you can do some more things with in like a traditional drop back passing game if the screen can take away those pass rushers. But if you don't run them effectively, there's no value of doing it anyways. So until they actually have a solid screen game, it's not a part of the offense that should be heavily utilized.
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't have the offensive line personnel whose respective strengths are really getting up to the second level and making the necessary blocks upfield. And just in general, screens are kind of a slow developing play, and screens also kind of at times leave a quarterback a little vulnerable because offensive line pieces are moving. So Joe Burrow's getting hit as it is, and I mean it's just something that's not really working. There are ways they can tweak things. There are ways that they can make this a successful type of situation where they run some screens, but I would like to see, John, more of kind of what they did last week with Gio Bernard, that little quick slant where he was able to kind of work. I think it was in the slot.
That was their best screen
right.
Of all time. And it was just him leaking out of the backfield, like slipping out there. And you had both the right guard and right tackle scream up to the second level. Like that was well called. That was well executed on that situation. But for the most part, those wide receiver screens and those like traditional halfback screens where it goes to the flats, yeah, those have been not very good.
Yeah, what about a tight end? In years past, with Eifert, they used to run those to moderate success. Is that something you think that they could do with the Drew sample and be successful?
I mean, potentially, but again, it's all a matter of how well the blocking gets out there in space effectively. Not just get out there in space, but taking good angles to those defenders, just clearing them out to get space. Because right now, you have guys being met with defenders at the catch point screens, and it's just basically a wasted play.
Yeah. Let's go to an email from Russ. What's your opinion on the value the Bengals are getting out of the investments in this year's free agent class? Any of them paying off in the first 3 games on the field? Well, so far, nothing from Trey Waynes because he's been hurt and he's on IR. Probably will come back, I would think, midway through the year. DJ Reader has been in there. I think he's been, even though the defensive stats won't show it, I don't know if I'd say he's been exceptional, but I think he's been pretty good, and you can tell the difference when he's in there and when he's not. He had the tip ball last week that caused an interception. When he went out in week 1, that's kind of when the Chargers started making more of the chunk plays in the run game. And he's played a lot of snaps. Hasn't had the impact play, got after the passer. Really the biggest play really is that tip that was an interception last week, John. But, I mean, you look at Mackenzie Alexander, decent. Xavier Suafilo, hurt. So I don't know. What other additional thoughts do you have on this crop of free agents that really was the most exciting outside free agent class they've brought in a really long time?
I think DJ Reader's been solid. Von Bell's also been solid, but none of them are making necessarily impact plays, even though they might not be the guys to make those type of plays. But how about the two, under the radar signings that they signed for this 1-year deals? LaShawn Sims has played like 8 snaps. He already has an interception. Great play against the Eagles when he came in for a hurt Darius Phillips. And Mike Thomas, who has emerged as a top 3 or 4 receiver in this receiving core. I think he leads the team in yards per hour run. He did lead the team after 2 weeks. I think Tyler Boyd's probably overtaking him now. But when Thomas has been called upon, he's been pretty productive. And I think he's developed a solid rapport for Burrow. So the two signings that I think no one really thought would make that much of an impact, they might be the best signings so far in this free agency class.
Yeah, it's kind of the lesser name guys, right? That are kind of making the plays so far, and unfortunately, injuries have kind of played part of that. You also throw in Mike Daniels, a guy that hasn't really shown up on the stat sheet, but I guess if you're a coach looking at it, you force the guy into a role that you didn't really envision. You kind of thought he would be a rotational player, keep guys fresh, and unfortunately, because of the Atkins situation, he's had to be a starter. And at this point in his career, and him coming off of an injury last year and all of that, it's not the ideal fit or situation in terms of him taking an immense amount of snaps right away. But I think you got to at least kind of tip your cap to him a little bit, saying, hey, you came in here and you're doing pretty much everything that the coaches are asking of you and more. And it's just not the situation everybody had envisioned for Mike Daniels. So, I think you got to tip your cap a little bit to him there, even though, again, the impact plays aren't there. Where do you want to go next, John?
Let's go to the Facebook comment section for Devin K again. What's your guys' thoughts on the coaches saying Joe needs to protect himself?
Joe needs to protect himself. Well, look, Joe Burrow is a creator, and that's one of his biggest strengths as a quarterback. And sometimes all of these guys, whether it's Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, whoever, they move around in the pocket. They'll take some risks, and they'll try and create a play. And that's one of the biggest attributes that is an improvement of Joe Burrow from Andy Dalton, right, John? I mean, it's the ad-lib stuff. It's the ability to go in there and, create something when plays break down. And sometimes he'll run into a hit. Sometimes he will run into a sack. And, I think sometimes you take that with all of the good that comes with that. Overall, though, that's not the biggest problem to me. It's the overall protection of him. He's getting hit and pressured on, I said this on our Wednesday show, almost 11% of all of it. He's getting sacked on 11% of all of his dropbacks. Pressured much higher than that. So to me, him running into sacks or him running into hits, while that is something to monitor, I don't think that's the biggest problem at all.
A tweet just popped up on my timeline from Pro Football Focus. Joe Burrow has been under pressure 51 times in under 2.5 seconds, which is 5 more than any other quarterback. And I think that's why the coaches are putting emphasis on him, because he's going to take these hits regardless of what he does when he's operating under structure and getting the ball out quickly and doing whatever he does outside of the pocket. Like, he's going to get hit regardless, because that's just how bad the offensive line is. So I think the coaches want him to minimize the extra hits that he may take when he's trying to create something out of nothing, because that's even more damage to his body just 3 or 4 weeks into the season. So it would be nice if we could have those extended plays and maybe he takes a couple of those hits. But when he's taking so many hits in general, I think the coaches are just emphasizing that we just want you to minimize them as much as you can, because unfortunately this offense line is not very good right now.
So, John, we've got a call on the line here. Who do we have here? This is the Orange and Black Insider Listener Questions Live. Who's this?
How you doing? It's Terrell.
What's going on, Terrell? Hey,
you even had to ask.
Did you ever get our care package there? The little gift we sent you?
Yeah, I appreciate it though. Too, I got a lot of my favorite playmakers in there too.
Okay, good. What's on your mind this week, buddy?
I just want to say the defense is getting there. We got a really young team. At the end of the day, we got a really young team. And I've been listening to you. I get what you're saying, Anthony. I understand that Zach is a young coach and he getting experience right now, but that record looking crazy right now. His record looking crazy, and I'm giving him to next year to at least try to go for the AFC North. But if he can't make it, I want Joe Brady or Urban Meyer. I know I'm jumping ahead of myself. But I'm just saying. And I want a King Davis Gates, Logan Wilson, and Pack start, and then try to move pieces to John Ross or somebody, and then I think we'll be all right. But I definitely think before we got Higgins, the future bright.
Well, we'll take some of your comments and questions off the air here. Thanks for calling in as always, Terrell. We'll answer some.
I was gonna say real quick.
Yep.
That backup quarterback is a question too.
The backup quarterback?
Yeah.
Okay.
For
Well,
next year.
Yeah, that's right. We're talking about Ryan Finley. Yeah, that's Finley played 3 games last year. So yeah, and to mixed results. Thanks, Terrell. We'll talk to you soon, my friend.
No problem. Y'all are great.
All right, you too. So one of he's got a couple of points that I want to talk about. One of which actually plays into another question that we received through Twitter. So we'll get to that in a second, John. But I guess there's kind of an overarching question, and it feeds into a lot of other questions we've received here, but it's a little bit of how long of a leash do you give Zach Taylor? And I think, especially with the major roster turnover this year, I think you give him all of 2020. I don't think that's a question, maybe even the majority, if not all of his staff. But I think if 21 starts off a winless first 3 weeks, first month, that's going to get ugly.
Yeah, it will. We don't really have a great precedent because, I mean, the stuff that happened in the first 10 years or so under Mike Brown, like they were just going through coaches left and right. Nothing was working. Then he found some form of consistency with Marvin Lewis, and then he held on to him even though the mediocrity was taking over actual success and they weren't progressed anywhere. So now we're back to square one where we have a young coach who's still finding his way, but at some point, like it has to produce results. And if you don't in the first 2 or 3 years and you invest all this money in free agency, you give him the power to hire all these new guys and you entrust that he puts in the right system and culture and it still doesn't work, like you have to try again. You have to just hit the reset button. And, again, this year has always been about growth. It's always been about progressing off of what you built on this offseason and getting in your own guys into the system. And if we don't see that towards the later part of this year and definitely into the next part of 2021, like you're in a situation where it's the Jets. Like it's only a matter of time before this head coach is out of there because it just simply didn't work out.
Mike Brown has gone on record when I think this was primarily when he was defending Marvin Lewis and some of those awkward situations and some of those years where a lot of fans were saying, hey, it's time to move on. Mike Brown's gone on record talking about how he wants to have continuity in the form of the Steelers. So, I think that's what he's trying to build. Who knows if that's going to be the case. Where do you want to go next, John?
Yeah. So how about you take that phone call and I'll just, I think I'll address Jamie Lopez in the Facebook comment section. Do you see a trade for an offensive lineman before the trade deadline? No, because it's not really what they do, even in desperate times. Like they've had plenty of situations where a trade of their own players for draft capital or trading for someone to help out their team has been an optimal route to take, and they just didn't do it because they just don't like to do that. They don't like to sacrifice future draft assets for an immediate fix. They always think ahead about and overvalue some of those types of things. Even how bad the offensive line is, I don't think they're going to do anything proactive about it. I think them bringing back Alex Redmond and throwing him out there is as proactive as you're going to see from this side right now.
So let's get to the phone call that we received here. It's Aaron from Cincinnati on the line. Aaron, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. And how you guys doing today?
Good. For calling in, man. What's on your mind?
Good. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all very much for doing this. You guys are fantastic. Weekly watch all the time.
Oh, thanks,
Can't
man.
always catch you live, but I watch it somehow.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. Second of all, I wanted to talk a bit more. It's funny. My initial question kind of got semi-asked or talked about in the last one with the Zach Taylor thing. Just a little bit on that. I've never had any real doubt in Zach Taylor until just recently with how he's handling the defense of the whole Jim Turner thing. It's kind of making me more concerned that he'll let his I used to think that he was actually somebody who holds somebody accountable with the whole benching Andy Dalton type deal, like things that we thought needed to be like your performance dictates your play and all that stuff. But and results dictate, if you stick around. But I'm not sure about that with, how he's talking about this offensive line and specifically Jim Turner, who has, to my knowledge and everything I've seen, zero reason why he should get such a long leash. Like he hasn't had a sustained amount of success anywhere in his career as far as I know. So that's the only thing that has me worried about Taylor. And that's the first time I ever felt like, this guy will put something before team success. It seems like he'll put this loyalty to Jim Turner before team success. But I'll go for it. So
no, go ahead.
Oh, but since that's like kind of only have what I'm talking about, I wanted to talk more about it's a certain narrative that I'm hearing about ruining Joe Burrow, and I don't feel like many people touched on this. With Joe Burrow's mindset, it's very similar. I just watched the last game documentary not too long ago, so it's fresh on my mind. And when I saw it the first year Jordan played, he got injured or whatever, and like everybody's like, "Oh, you got to sit him because you're going to ruin him." But my thing is, you don't ruin a player like Joe Burrow with that mentality physically so much as you will mentally. When you concede loss to somebody who never has conceded loss, has that mentality that's so fierce and so driven towards victory that they're willing to put their body on the line and all that stuff. I think the way you lose Joe Burrow, more so than physically, is mentally. Because all of his game, we always talk about it, it's all mental. It's all in his head. So when he loses confidence that you are doing everything that you can to win, just like he's doing everything that he can to win, that's how I think you lose Joe Burrow. So if people start, if coaches are starting to try to coach him out of, extending that play and things like that, and he loses faith in the organization, and that's I think how you ruin Joe Burrow really. Like, because I feel like he's the kind of guy. If my career is 15 years and I don't win anything, then why did I even have a career? It's that type of mindset. I think he's the type of guy who'd rather go 5 years and win and compete for a Super Bowl every single time, and then that be his career versus 15 years of mediocrity.
Yep.
And that's what I think this city needs.
Good points. We're going to talk about some of those off the air, both the character aspect with Zach Taylor that you mentioned, and then, of course, what you mentioned with Joe Burrow. Two very good points and very good questions. Appreciate you calling in, Aaron. Don't be a stranger.
No problem. Thank you all very much once again.
Thanks, bud. So to the first point, John, there's a large talking about Zach Taylor, Jim Turner, character, all that kind of stuff. I feel like we've talked about this a lot, but it still bears repeating, especially with some of the stuff that Jim Turner has come out with week and sense of Bobby Hart, all this kind of stuff. Zach Taylor has reached character, locker room culture, all of that into a large picture. He has done so. I mean, I don't think Vontaze Burfict was a bad guy off the field, but he was crippling the team on the field with his penalties and injuries and all that kind of stuff. He shed that. He stayed away from some character guys in the draft, that sort of thing. But then Jim Turner has a history. I'm all for giving people second chances. I'm not in the business of getting rid of guys that, calling for people getting fired. But there is a track record with Jim Turner there. And, of course, we've seen some things from Bobby Hart this offseason that make you question some things as well. So there's just a little inconsistency, and I think that's the first part of what Aaron was talking about.
There is a reason why nepotism is generally frowned upon in business practices, because you can preach accountability and character and discipline all you want, but at the end of the day, there is no human on the face of the earth that isn't going to treat his family with a little bit more leniency. Jim Turner is family of Zach Taylor. Jim Turner's wife he is a cousin of Mike Sherman, who is Zach Taylor's father-in-law. They are family, and that's the reason why, despite Jim Turner's rap sheet about everything that made him not only a bad coach but a bad person from the public perception, Zach Taylor hired him, he backed him, and ever since then, despite the badness that he's put on the Bengals offensive line and just the team in general, he's stuck by him. He's stood by him because he is family. And there is always going to be that soft spot towards family. And that's why, you don't really want nepotism in your organization, because it can lead to incompetence in ways where some accountability would be welcome.
Well, you put the blinders on, right? I mean,
Exactly.
you put the blinders on to some of the problems and issues and all of that. Because you're able to overlook somebody because they are family, they are a close friend, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, a lot of times that can work because, there's a meshing of culture and mindsets and all of that. But like you said, in a lot of ways, there's a turn a blind eye to some of these things and some issues that a lot of people with an outside perspective bring. To the second point that Aaron brought up, quote unquote, ruining Joe Burrow, either physically or mentally. Here's my thing on it. Obviously, when you start going down that rabbit hole and the route that Aaron was just talking about, you immediately start to think about Carson Palmer, right? Where he quit. He decided to not play football anymore because, number one, it wasn't fun to play in Cincinnati for, and we can speculate on the reasons for that. But essentially, he grew frustrated, and he's come out and said this, particularly this offseason when the Bengals are drafting Joe Burrow. He grew frustrated in the fact that he didn't feel the organization was all in on winning, providing him the pieces needed, etc. I feel that there was talk this offseason when the Bengals met with Joe Burrow that they were kind of laying out the plan, right? I mean, that was kind of some of their pre-draft visits. We're going to draft you, and this is the plan. We're going to be active in free agency. We brought in these guys, blah, 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 blah. Now here we are 3 games in. He's, one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the league, one of the most pressured quarterbacks in the league. My thing with that, John, is I begin to worry not only, of course, if and when there's a physical injury, but when you start seeing Joe Burrow develop bad habits that you didn't see at LSU, when his eyes aren't moving upfield, when he's avoiding pressure, when his head is down. Some of the things we saw from Andy Dalton, especially late in his career, right? That's when I start to become concerned in terms of quote unquote ruining Joe Burrow.
That's a good point. I think the sacks can take a hold. Can take a toll, on any quarterback. It doesn't matter if you're Joe Burrow or David Carr. It'll come to you if you get hit and sacked enough. Like those demons will pop up even if they aren't there. We saw with Baker Mayfield a little bit last year in the early portion of this season before he ran train on the Bengals. But I think you're right. Like I think with Palmer, it was more of he understood that there was a lack of aggression in terms of the Bengals becoming a better team in other methods like spending in free agency. And I think the Bengals took a big step forward with that this offseason by investing a lot of money in outside free agents to better the team immediately. I think that was a message they were trying to send to Joe Burrow, like, hey, we're progressing, we're learning lessons from our mistakes from the last time we had a first overall quarterback. So I think Burrow has gotten the message early on that there is a greater sense of aggression. And going back to Turner, it was an interesting point brought up by, I think, the Lockdown Boys with Jake and James, that they found out that Ben Martin was on the field, the assistant offensive line coach, and Jim Turner was up in the press box handling his duties up there. And I think that was the first time that they've done that. So it's not enough for me to say that Turner is being pushed out of the door, but I think they're willing to try new things without changing up everything and firing people and trying to get some quick turnover with the staff. So they are at least doing some things, and they're acting with a little bit more aggression than they have in years past. And I think that bodes well for Burrow and the communication with the organization as a whole. Like, if this isn't working, we need to do other things. But at the same time, it's also about putting together a good team at the end of the day. And if they don't with Burrow, then those questions can start popping up in a couple years down the road.
Great phone call from Aaron. Appreciate the compliments that he paid us and the insight that he gave us a lot to talk about. We're going to be here for a few more minutes fielding some of your questions. You can leave them in one of 3 live comment threads on CincyJungle.com, on our YouTube channel, or the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. We'll be fielding those. We'll be taking more calls and texts, 949-542-6241. And then, of course, at Bengals OBI on Twitter, the obinsider@gmail.com via email. John, where are you seeing we should go next?
Let's go to Jerry Lowell, I think, in the Facebook comment section. Do you think the lack of OTA and no preseason has any bearing at all on the lack of cohesiveness and the inability to push it through to a win, since this is a pretty much new team together with rookies, free agency, and those coming back after injury?
Chicken or the egg, right? I mean, is it the lack of 2 preseasons? We know 2019. It took forever for Zach Taylor to get to Cincinnati, be announced as the hire, assemble his and when we don't even know how far down the pecking order some of these coaching hires were for him, because when he came to Cincinnati late, a lot of great candidates were hired throughout before he was even announced, right? I mean, so we don't know how far down the pecking order he had to go on his wish list for other coaches. So you can point to that offseason, you can point to this unique offseason, and I think you can call them excuses, but I do think they are reasons for some of the issues that we've been seeing over the past 2 seasons. I don't think you can deny that, but again, when you're setting records for these one-score games, John, and not being able to win those 14 losses and 1 tie and 1-score games in a row, that you at some point got to point the finger at the coaching staff on that front.
And I think it's fair for a team that has a lot of roster turnover that these questions are popping up, at least early on in the season with no preseason. They're still gelling together, but it's not an excuse that's like limited to them. Like every team had the same offseason schedule. Every team was virtual up until July, and every team had the opportunity to just mesh really quickly in just the 1 month that they've been together. But some teams, had still a core that was maintained together and didn't bring in as many new faces and had a rookie quarterback to go under. So there is a little bit of leniency, but at the end of the day, there's a reason why some teams are 3-0 and some teams are 0-2-1. Like the talent and the coaching combined, like that's what's going to push through to win games. Right now, we've known that they had talent deficiencies at important areas, and we know that they had questions with the coaching staff that still need to be answered. And right now, neither one of those units is performing up to their potential. And then we also had some questions about like the defense. Like, are they being too vanilla? Or are they not just gelling together in general? I don't think the defense has been that vanilla. I think they've shown that they're multiple and they're disguising coverages pre-snap. But right now, it's mostly about execution. I think that can go for the offense as well. I don't think the play calling on either side of the ball has been as bland as the perception as it is. When the execution is not there and you're wondering if these guys are talented, why aren't they producing results? It immediately goes to the coaching without even thinking twice about it. But when you take a closer look at it, it's mainly been on the execution. And maybe that goes into the fact that they haven't had that much time to gel together because the defense has so many new starters. But it's more of a mix of both problems than just putting it all on the coaching.
Yeah, and look, personnel-wise for the defense, we've said a bunch of times the success of this defense, and this has been the case throughout almost all of his career, goes through Geno Atkins. And when you don't have Geno Atkins for a month, that you're going to notice a difference there. The Bengals are, at least they were going into last week, a top 10 team against the pass. So they're defending the pass relatively well, and William Jackson's having a pretty good season with that. A couple pass interference penalties in the past 2 weeks notwithstanding. But, overall, he's having a pretty good season. Phillips up and down, but I think, really getting his first crack at starting, he's doing okay. Jesse Bates had the outstanding week 1, the really poor week 2, kind of had an okay week 3. So, he's playing okay. Sean Williams is coming back. He didn't play a defensive snap last week, which was interesting, but he's coming back from injury. So, I think they're doing some things okay, but the Geno Atkins absence is very noticeable. And on one hand, I understand that you want to plan around having him because he has been such a durable warrior. But on the other hand, you have to be able to still be a capable unit without a star player in there. That's just the reality. Yeah.
So where do you want to go next?
We'll take a couple more before we get on out of here because we're going a little long. This was an interesting one, and we didn't get to this because another call came in. I think it played to part of Terrell's second part of his phone call. It's a tweet from Jackson Ford. With a lot of players underperforming this year, like AJ Ross and Price, do you think we will see even more roster turnover next season? Maybe not to the extent of linebacker, which, by the way, I think the Bengals brought in 5 or 6 new guys at linebacker this offseason alone. But I do anticipate some higher profile names not coming back this year, and Terrell kind of touched on that same point. So there are a couple things. Number one, do you expect another huge roster turnover this year going in 21? And then if you do, does that again prompt another growing pain type of year when you do that to a roster 2-3 years in a row?
I don't know if it's going to be as dramatic as this past one was. You can bet the farm that neither John Ross or Billy Price are coming back, and that's 2 first-round picks to end the Marvin Lewis era that completely have derailed their progress up to this point. They're going to have decisions with Geno and Carlos, but I think the defense line is just not ready for both of those guys to leave, even for the sake of saving $14 million in total of cap space. And unless they compensate that loss with 2 defensive starters, I'm not sure that either of those guys are going to go. There's some other decisions that they have to make. And I think for the most part, their free agency class, most of those guys are probably just going to be testing the market and seeing if they get any compensatory picks back, with maybe the exception of like William Jackson, Carl Lawson, who have been playing like they deserve second deals. So I don't know if it's going to be as extreme where you're seeing a lot of veterans cut, aside from Ross and Price specifically. But yeah, there's always going to be turnover, especially when you're entering year 2 or 3 of a new coaching staff and you're just liquidating the old coaches, players and guys that they drafted. But to the extent of this past year, I'm not sure it's going to be like that.
I agree. And part of the thing that makes another roster turnover or losing these 3 players that are mentioned, AJ, Ross, and Price, a bit easier if they do end up not keeping any of them. They haven't had them much over the past couple of years anyways, be it injury, ineffective play, what have you. So even if they don't have them, what's really truly the impact? I mean, if you're looking back to 2016, 2015 with AJ Green, sure. But 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, AJ, Price, Ross have largely either been unavailable or ineffective when they've been in there. So, I mean, even if you're talking roster turnover with those 3, is that a big difference? I don't know. Do you see one maybe in the Cincy Jungle chat? We haven't gotten to one there yet. On the post there, did you see anything there that piques your interest?
Yeah, there was one from Hexter. He was asking about just the offensive line in general, and I think we've covered the offensive line for the most part. It was just he's asking why can't the Bengals evaluate offensive linemen in town, or do they just not value good line play at all? It could be both. I mean, they were going into this season. They only added a career backup at right guard, and they trusted him to start and be a good starter. And then in the draft, they waited until the 6th round to add someone. So it is a part of not valuing linemen enough because they didn't do enough to add talent there. But it's also the fact that because they had trust that the guys that they had coming back to start were going to be good enough. And right now, Bobby Hart continues to not be good enough to start anywhere in the league. And Michael Jordan still hasn't really taken that next step to be a competent starter. So I think it's both. But one comes before the other probably, and it's the fact that they had too much trust in evaluating and developing the talent that they already had.
There's inconsistent valuing of interior offensive linemen from the Cincinnati Bengals, right? I mean, they've shown that, hey, we'll take a Kevin Zeiler at the end of a first round. We'll take an Eric Steinbach at the beginning of a second round, but we won't keep him past the rookie contract, right? I mean, and those type of moves really cripple your franchise. We'll go get a Bobby Williams and keep him around for a while, but hey, we think we can replace him in somewhere in the 4th round, 5th round, 6th round. And it's the Bengals have shown in certain draft classes great especially for their limited scouting staff. They have shown that they can find great value. You look back to that draft with George Aloka and Marvin Jones, getting them on day 3. It's like, what? Those guys were great finds for the team. TJ Hushmanzada, 7th round. I mean, there's a lot of different examples, but the fact remains is they're inconsistent on that. And they have, it's not, to me, I don't know that there are examples of them not evaluating offensive line talent properly, particularly in the 2015 draft when they took Aboihi and Fisher. But I mean, they had the best offensive lineman that's ever played in the NFL in Anthony Munoz. They had a great offensive line with him, and the offensive line that Andy Dalton had and Carson Palmer had for most of his Bengals career, those were outstanding offensive lines. They know how to draft offensive linemen. To me, John, I think the problem is more overconfidence in their own evaluation process, or overconfidence in, hey, we've got certain guys that we like, and we don't need to draft. We don't need to draft a guy in the 2nd round or 3rd round. Maybe there's a little contradiction in what I'm saying there, but I don't know. It just seems that they're overconfident in sometimes in some of these players, whereas we look at them and go, I don't get it.
No, like that's completely true. Like you look at the linemen that they've drafted in the past 5 years, it goes from Cedric Aboihi to Jake Fisher to Billy Price to Keem Dennegy, and then Jonah Williams is in there. He's clearly the only hit that they've had in recent years at the position. Like, remember, you guys remember JJ Dielman? He was like cut as a 5th round pick before he even played a game, and he ended up with the Broncos later. So it's a problem of evaluating the wrong traits, and like you said, having too much confidence and taking those raw traits and turning them into tangible, competent traits that they've never had been before when they were college and high school players. So it is an overconfidence and almost an arrogance, because confidence usually ends up with results and arrogance is just false confidence. But yeah, it is a mix of both. And at the end of the day, they just need to reevaluate what makes a good offensive lineman a good offensive lineman, and then try to find where you can get that. And most part, it's early in the draft and in free agency.
Yeah, it's almost, some of these guys, it's like they valued some of these athletic metrics and or strength over actually, can this guy play football, right? I mean, Cedric Boyhe was an athletic guy, but can he actually play football? His tape was kind of all over the place in college. Dielman, if I remember correctly, he kind of had some good, RAS numbers and whatnot, but, could he play? Westerman is a guy that didn't really, by most rumors, didn't have it upstairs. He could play, but he wasn't grasping the playbook, and they couldn't trust him. So there, I mean, it's kind of like, at some point you got to evaluate these guys, and you got to say, okay, the athleticism and all that stuff's great and the strength is there, but can these guys play? What does their tape say? And sometimes it's almost like, well, we can coach that up. They look at the tape and they see issue. Well, we can coach that up. And then they get to the pros and it's like, oh wait, we can't. Anything else you want to get to before we hop on out of here, John? Anything kind of spiking your interest?
Honestly, we're just at the point of the year where the questions are more and more that they just mold into like the same deprecation and depression. So not your guys' fault. I mean, I know a lot of you guys expected a winning season in the offseason based on what they did, but we're kind of right back to where we've been for the past 3 or 4 years now. And I don't fault you guys, but it's just the way it is. Until they're bad until they're not. That's how the manager of Big Cat Country, the Jacksonville Jaguars, SB Nation side, that's what he said before they, kind of went off in 2017. Like, the Jaguars are bad until they prove that they aren't. And that's the same one for the Bengals. They've been a bad team for 4 years now, and they will continue to be bad until they prove that they aren't.
Yep. One quick one before we hop out of here. Mark Pleva in the Facebook chat, will T. Higgins have a bigger part in the offense going forward? I would say so. I think so, especially with the random benchings of Auden Tate and John Ross the past couple of weeks, and with T. Higgins getting 2 touchdowns. Also, Higgins and Burrow worked out with Jordan Palmer out in my neck of the woods this offseason before they were drafted, so they were kind of already building a little bit of a rapport in these spring workouts. So I would expect, especially with the lack of big plays, big passes, John, I would expect this to kind of be a trend going forward with what T. Higgins showed last week against the Eagles.
Right. And I think Burrow's deep ball lack of production in that arena has gotten some buzz on Twitter today. And part of that is just its lack of timing and placement. And Higgins has been a part of that too. Like, the 2 biggest plays that they missed against the Eagles both targeted Higgins. They were both slight underthrows. So like they're going to happen eventually. Burrow's too good of a passer in those situations to not get that ironed out. And part of that, I think, was just the lack of reps that they got with these guys in the offseason because of injury and also because of everything was virtual for the most part. But it's got to come around soon if they expect to have any progress in terms of winning. But it does need to improve with how everything else is going on in the offense right now.
Yep. Well, good stuff, John. Thank you, everyone, for all of the questions. We got to as many as we could. We tried to rapid fire this thing, and we got to as many platforms as we could. I think we got at least one from each one of the different areas in which you guys reached us. So thanks so much for your emails, your calls, your texts, your chats, your comment thread questions, your tweets, all that stuff. Thank you so much for all of that, John. Thank you. As a reminder, John, myself, and Matt Minnick are going to be on the Cincy Jungle pregame show an hour before kickoff against the Jaguars. We're going to have some fun talking some Bengals and hanging out. And then, of course, we have special guests. The Bengals captain and his lovely wife are going to be joining us for the pregame show inside of Paul Brown Stadium. The first game, I mean, it's only one of 2 games so far, but the first game in which the Bengals are allowing fans inside the stadium this year. Obviously very, very limited capacity. So they're going to get to us live from inside Paul Brown Stadium, which should be interesting. So we'll be chatting with them and have some giveaways courtesy of Narragansett beer. So John, should be fun.
Yeah. I hope those 2 stay safe as well as everyone else who deems it worthy of going to that game. The 6,000 of you, I think, that can fill up Paul Brown Stadium. So should be fun to get an inside look at what's going on down there.
Yeah. And if you're going in there, give my cardboard cut out a high five. Go ahead and give me a high five. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be there for the pregame show. You can join us for the postgame show shortly after the game. And then we've got our Monday news jump. And of course, John and I will be doing the Wednesday show again from the Orange and Black Insider. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you next time, and we'll get to your questions.